The rain was coming down in a steady drizzle, the kind that turned the pavement slick and reflected the glow of streetlights. It was late, and the streets were nearly empty, save for my car steadily making its way down Main Street. I was tired after a long day, the kind where all you want is a hot shower and silence. But as I drove, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of my mind. Something felt off, one of those gut instincts you can't quite explain. That's when I saw them, red and blue lights flashing in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser. Here we go, I muttered under my breath. My speed was fine, my taillights worked, and my plates were valid. Still, I knew what this was. Driving while black? Classic. I sighed, signaling to pull over to the side of the road. My hands automatically went to 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. A habit drilled into me for survival. The drill was familiar. Comply, stay calm, and hope for the best. The cruiser stopped behind me, and I watched as a tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out. His boots crunched on the wet pavement, his hat pulled low over his face. His posture screamed authority, and I could tell by the way he carried himself that he relished every second of this. As he approached my window, I braced myself. License and registration, he barked, his tone sharp and devoid of any courtesy. No greeting, no explanation, just a command. His voice carried the kind of weight that implied guilt without evidence. "Good evening, officer," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" "You were driving suspiciously slow," he said, squinting at me as though I'd just insulted him. I blinked. "Suspiciously slow?" I repeated, my disbelief evident. "It's raining. I'm just being cautious." He leaned closer, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Cautious? Huh. Or maybe you've got something to hide. What's in the car? Pal?" There it was, that word. Pal. Not sir or mister, but pal, delivered with enough condescension to make my blood simmer. I kept my tone calm. "Officer, I don't have anything to hide. Everything's in order." Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my glove compartment to retrieve my license and registration. The last thing I needed was for him to misinterpret the movement. He snatched the documents from my hand with unnecessary force and stalked back to his cruiser without another word. As I watched him in my side mirror, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. He was the type who wouldn't let this go easily. Sure enough, when he returned, his face was set in a scowl. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "What's the reason, officer?" I asked, keeping my tone polite but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, emphasizing each word like I was hard of hearing. Sighing, I complied. I stepped out into the drizzle, the cold seeping through my jacket almost instantly. The officer gestured toward the back of the car. "Open the trunk." "With all due respect, officer, you need a warrant for that," I said, standing my ground. His lips curled into a smirk, the kind that made my stomach churn. "That's where you're wrong. I can check whatever I damn well please." "Actually, no, you can't," I replied, my voice steady but firm. But he wasn't listening, ignoring me entirely. He moved toward the trunk, fumbling with his keyring like he owned the car. "Officer, you're violating my rights," I said louder, but my words fell on deaf ears. He popped the trunk open, his expression smug, as though he'd just won some unspoken battle. Inside the trunk sat a sleek gray document case, neatly placed in the corner. His eyes zeroed in on it immediately. "What's this?" he asked, suspicion dripping from his voice. "Personal property," I said sharply. "You have no right to touch that." But, of course, he didn't care. He reached for the case, his smirk widening as he unlatched it. My heart pounded as he opened it, his eagerness palpable. For a moment, he looked like a kid on Christmas morning. Then, his expression froze. His face drained of color as he stared at the document lying neatly on top. His jaw tightened, and his hands trembled as he held the paper closer to his face. "Officer Thomas Hendrick," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Do you want to explain why you just violated the rights of your new boss?" "Let me tell you something about people like Hendrick," They don't know when to quit, even when it was clear he was in over his head. He tried to bluff his way through. He held up the document case like it was still some kind of trophy. "What's in here?" "Huh?" he asked, his voice faltering. "Put it down," I said, my tone cold and measured. "That's private property, and you're way out of line." Ignoring me, he flipped open the document. The moment his eyes landed on the bold letters at the top, his bravado evaporated. I leaned against my car, arms crossed. "What's the matter, Officer Hendrick?" I asked, my tone laced with sarcasm. "Something catch your eye?" His lips moved soundlessly, his eyes darting back and forth across the page. From where I stood, I could see the words clearly. Notice of termination. Beneath it, his name was listed, followed by a detailed account of his violations. At the bottom, my signature stood out in bold ink. Chief Marcus Grant. You're the, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Chief of Police." I finished for him. "Yes, Officer Hendrick. That's me." For the first time that night, Hendrick looked genuinely afraid. This has to be a mistake," he stammered. "You're not supposed to." "Not supposed to what?" I interrupted. "Be your boss? Sorry to disappoint, but here I am." He took a shaky step back, the papers still clutched in his hands. "Look, we can work this out." "Okay, I didn't mean anything by it." "Oh, you didn't mean anything by it?" I echoed, my voice dripping with mockery. "So, stopping me for no reason, searching my car without a warrant, and violating my rights, none of that meant anything?" "Come on, man," he said, his tone shifting to desperation. "This job, it's all I've got. I made a mistake. Okay, but I can change." "Change?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You had your chance. And from the looks of this document, this isn't the first time you've crossed the line." His silence confirmed what I already knew. Pulling out my phone, I dialed a number I'd been saving for this moment. The line rang once before it was answered. "Chief Peterson," came the voice on the other end. "It's Marcus Grant," I said. "I've got Officer Hendrick here with me. Effective immediately. He's terminated. Notify HR and ensure the paperwork is expedited." Hendrick's face crumpled. "Wait, please. You don't have to do this." I silenced him with a look. "It's done. Hendrick, pack your things and turn in your badge by the end of the day." Ending the call, I turned back to him. "Here's a tip," I said, stepping closer. "Next time you put on a uniform, if anyone's foolish enough to give you another one, remember what it stands for. Protect and serve, not harass and intimidate." He didn't respond. He just stood there, drenched and defeated, as I picked up the document case and closed the trunk. By the end of the week, the department released an official statement confirming Hendrick's termination. His career was over, and his reputation was in ruins. As for me, I drove home that night with a sense of satisfaction, knowing justice had been served, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been on the receiving end of his abuse. Hendrick had thought he could play predator, but he'd learned the hard way that sometimes the predator becomes the prey.